Hello, everyone. Welcome to the workshop and masterclass learning series 2021, presented at the 10th edition of the BMO IFFSA Toronto 2021 Festival. IFFSA is the largest South Asian film festival in North America, and today we are discussing a topic that is very near and dear to my heart and probably to the hearts of all of the producers out there: funding. How do we get that money to make your project reality? So today, we have two very special guests joining us. We've got Rod Butler, who's the Director of Programs and Policy at CMF, and Anna Newallo, who's the Program Consultant of the Film Fund at Ontario Creates. A little bit about each of them, and then we'll dive into some questions. So Rod, as the Director of Programs and Policy at the Canada Media Fund, is responsible for developing CMF policy and analyzing and advising on legal and regulatory issues that impact the CMF. Prior to joining the CMF, Rod worked at the Writers Guild of Canada and Entertainment One. As a trained lawyer, Rob obtained his Bachelor's of Law from Queen's University and his Bachelor of Arts honors degree in Media and Information and Technoculture from Western University. And Anna has 3 decades of proven experience in the film and television industry. As a program consultant at Ontario Creates, her portfolio contains a wide range of programs and initiatives, including the Film Fund for production and development, marketing and distribution initiatives, and industry development program. As a producer, her award-winning independent films have played major international festivals, and as a writer, her short stories have appeared in numerous publications. Prior to joining Ontario Creates, she worked on projects for the Disney Channel, CTV, Discovery Channel, CBC, TMN, which is now Crave, City TV, and Bravo. Those are pretty impressive resumes on both sides, and I'm also interested, as we dive in, to know about your experience working on both sides of the story in terms of as an independent producer, as well as working for Ontario Creates. So, but Rod, why don't we start with you? Can you just give us an overview of the CMF, what you do, and then also what your current mandates are, and you know what you guys are looking for?
Sure. So when I usually do these panels, I think we can get into the weeds fast. So I will be very high level. I want this to be as painless as possible. There may be some pain, and I apologize, but as painless as possible. So the CMF is basically this big pile of money that hopefully will be used to fund everyone's content. We get our sources of funding from both the private side and the public side. And so it's this unique relationship. When people sometimes ask me, why is the rule that way? Oftentimes it goes back to who our funders are and where we are in the moment of a period of great transition. And so the CMF gives out money through programs. And as the Director of Policy and Programs, me along with my team, we have to create the rules and the guidelines to basically give out this money in a transparent way. This is, half our funds from the federal government of Canada. It's the public purse, it's taxpayer money. We have to make sure that you don't go buy a yacht. We have to make sure that it goes to your content, and we can report on it effectively and responsibly. So there are many programs, many. If you go on our website, and for that, I apologize. I also write the guidelines, and so I also apologize for that too. It's a combination of trying to make it as user-friendly as possible, but we need to make sure that everyone's aware of their obligations and responsibilities. And so I'd say big pile of money. It's separated into 2 main branches: the convergent stream, which is our linear television stream, and our experimental stream, which is our kind of interactive digital media, games, apps, etc. So we don't fund film unless there's this broadcast license agreement that's attached to it. So everyone's going to read all of our rules. Everyone's going to read all of our guidelines. But the biggest, I think, frustration and what I would impart for people to do today is there's a gatekeeping function in our guidelines. So if you have a project, a linear project, let's say I want to make a TV show, you cannot access funding without a commitment, a financial commitment from a Canadian CRTC licensed broadcaster. That effectively unlocks the CMF's funds. So without that gatekeeper, unfortunately, you cannot get that our money. In the experimental stream, it's a bit different. There's not a broadcaster as a gatekeeper or a broadcast trigger. But for the vast majority of our funds in our linear television side, in the convergent stream, you need a broadcaster. So if you forget everything else I said today, if everything else is kind of just, you gloss over, the Canadian broadcaster you need. And so we have a variety of programs. Some of them are first come, first serve. Some of them are selective. But the biggest, we can get into this a bit more later on in the conversation. The biggest program we have is something called the Performance Envelope Program. And broadcasters have envelopes of CMF funds that they release to certain projects. So that's the kind of 30,000 foot view. We can kind of delve into the details a bit more later on, but I would say broadcaster trigger, multiple sources of funding, and read the guidelines and call and ask a lot of questions.
Thank you very much for that, Rod. And I think that, for producers trying to access funds, I think it's no surprise that there are gatekeepers involved. So, but we will definitely delve into that because I have some insights as well as a producer who's worked on both sides in terms of applying for the experimental stream as well as applying through the CBC. Before we dive into those specifics, and it would be great if you could give us a similar overview of Ontario Creates and what the fund's purposes are, and also your mandates and current guidelines.
Okay, so I'll start with Ontario Creates, which we are a provincial agency, and we facilitate economic development and investment and collaboration with Ontario's creative industries. It's not just film and TV, but it's also music and book and magazine and interactive digital media sector, which is one of our large sectors as well. On the film fund side, there are two consultants. There's myself, I'm the lead on the production side, and Karam Masri is the other consultant. So I'm responsible for the drama and the animation. I work with the jury on reviewing the applications, and Karam does the documentary. So depending on what genre your production is, you'll be speaking to one of the two of us. And then Karam is then the lead of the development film fund, but we basically split the workload on the development side of things. And then the film fund supports a range of projects that are both industrial and creative benefits. And we measure results via the net benefit of the project to the province. So it's not limited to, but it includes like the return on investment and job creation. So the economic impact is a big factor in with this. The objectives of the film fund, it's to increase the level of domestic feature film production in Ontario by supporting a range of genres and budgets. We also want to assist in capitalizing the Ontario feature film production companies, and again, to contribute to the financing of productions that will have positive contribution to the Ontario economy. That I keep stressing, but that is it's just the reality. That's a big factor of what we do.
Well, I think it's very interesting that is, because I think that, as a new producer, when you're trying to get your project made, a lot of your focus is on the creative in terms of this is a great project and, this is why it would be beneficial to, for example, a community or a story that hasn't been told. But I think that IDM, it's really important for young producers to know that the program, one of the main mandates is how is this going to benefit the Ontario economy at large. So in terms of the split on your end, Anna, when you see applications come in, and I know we won't get into the nitty gritty in terms of, I believe that there's a percentage assigned to that specific part, but how important is it to Ontario Creates when you're looking at those applications in terms of, will this have an economic impact as well as a socioeconomic impact?
It's actually quite or it can be quite significant, because we do have two streams. One is, we have the standard stream, and then we have a diverse stream. And so on the standard stream, the economic impact is actually worth 40% of your overall score. So it is quite heavy, and creatively would be worth 20%, just to give you an idea of what the difference is, what the impact is. But that is really what we're looking for, is the dollars that are being spent in Ontario, because we want to see what that return on the investment is. And then creatively, yes, I mean, we do read the scripts. We have to make sure that the script is ready. We do look at the production team. So there are a number of things that we do look at. It just comes down to how they're weighted. And under the standard stream, the economic impact has a significant weight at 40%.
Well, that's great. And something interesting that you also said was the return on investment. So can we talk about, and I know we have a list of questions to go through, and I promise we'll get there, but can we just talk about for both the funds, what the scenario would look like when you're putting it together? Is it a grant? Is it a, with the CMF, for example, Rod, I know that you guys, it's an investment that certain funds are. Can you talk a little bit about it?
For sure. It's, so our nature of contribution varies by program. So it's tough to say on the whole what the CMF's nature of contribution is, but I would say in development, it's usually a repayable advance. So once you go into production, you go to camera, you pay it back. In production, it's this combination. And so, I'll speak kind of in generalities, but in most programs, there's something called the license fee top up. And that's literally the license fee that you need of a broadcaster who's CRTC licensed. They basically get to top up that license fee up to 20% of the program's budget. After 20%, usually goes 20% to 49%. So that additional 29% can be an equity investment. So it's this kind of mix and match. The big difference, and I want to stress this, license fee top up has this unique relationship with the tax regs right now. So license fee top up does not grind your tax credit, whereas an equity investment, a non-repayable contribution, a grant, those would grind that tax credit. So most producers love the license fee top up. It's their best friend. And so we would recoup anything where we have an equity investment, but I think the CMF has seen over the past few years, we're not being put in as an equity partner in those projects. And so our recoupment is not necessarily as much a driving force as the scenario that Anne is talking about. Our mandate is a bit broader in the sense of there's an industrial mandate, but there's also a cultural one. So we're not always looking at things through the lens of, what is the return on investment for the CMF? We're thinking of it a little bit broader in terms of the cultural good that this is doing. And also, what is the leverage amplifier effect for the economy? So outside of the dollars and cents that the CMF gets back from an investment in a project, what is the leverage effect to the economy? How many jobs were created? Who paid taxes on the jobs that they work? So it's a little bit of a ripple effect that we think that's an industrial argument that's really powerful.
Well, I think that, and now I'm gonna dive into the next question, because I think that both of you touched on it in different ways. Anna, you mentioned, that there's a diverse section to Ontario Creates, and I think in light of recent events, including the creation of the Indigenous Screen Office and the Black Screen Office, I know that both of your organizations have been shifting in an information gathering mode. And the consensus is basically that, we need to take a conscious approach to funding diverse stories. So I'm curious if both of you can talk a little bit about what your organizations have been doing in terms of attracting those newer voices, new producers with those diverse stories, as well as supports available to them.
Who did you want to go first?
Oh, well, Anna, why don't you go first?
Okay. Sure. Well, as an agency, Ontario Creates has actually been supporting a number of the reports that have been coming out, including the ISO's on-screen protocols and pathways. The Black Screen Office is working on creating their own, and we're supporting them. There was the Women in View on Screen 2021 report, which came out in May, that we also supported, and that looked at the roles of women in key positions: producer, writer, director, showrunner, and then they also broke it down into by looking at the women, Indigenous women and BIPOC women, and what kind of roles that they have been getting. So we're very open to the reports that have been coming out, to the change in the landscape within the industry, and we are changing along with that. The definition of diversity that we use the provincial definition, which is quite broad, but we've kind of enhanced it in our guidelines to say that we value and support diversity and gender parity at all levels, and that we acknowledge that many communities face these systematic barriers that prevent them from participating meaningfully within these industries. And so what we're doing is we're applying this lens of inclusivity and equity and diversity to the criteria program. And what we want to do is anybody who comes in with a project that they say that it's to strengthen diversity and gender parity in Ontario, they're expected to tangibly demonstrate a genuine, sustained commitment to equity-seeking communities. So basically, we're not just looking for lip service, right? And then we even go further in our guidelines by stating that we encourage applications by production companies that are led by BIPOC or Francophone applicants. And what's new this year is like this lens of diversity and inclusivity and equity that I mentioned. What's new is that we're actually applying that across all of our funds for all of our applications. So regardless, like on the production side, regardless of whether you request to come in under the diversity stream, we're looking at diversity for those projects that are coming in under the standard stream as well. So we're applying that across the board, and the focus is to bring new stories from a range of voices by doing this. And we look at everything. We look at in front of the camera, we look at behind the camera, we look at the makeup of the production company. Like, we're really looking at everything. The diversity enhancement, which is the stream that exists in the production side, it was a 3-year commitment from the provincial government. There was additional funds that we got. It actually expired. So it concluded in 2019-2020 year. And what happened is the board at Ontario Creates prioritized diversity, and they found additional funds within the organization to be able to continue it. So we continued it in the 2021 year, and we're continuing it now in the 21-22 year. It is at less funding. It's not as high as it was previously. So that is what we're doing in terms of diversity and really being able to reach out. For the to the other part of a question about emerging producers and how to navigate through this, whether you're emerging or seasoned, just like Rod mentioned before, we're always available for people to talk, but you do need to read the requirements. You have any questions, we are there for you to answer any questions, know what the requirements are. But I think, the fund that might be of interest to people that are a little bit more emerging is maybe our development fund. And the reason I say that is because even though there are requirements that have to be met, the opportunity, if the success rate is better. Last year, about 50% of the applications were awarded support from us. And then if you look at the same year and compare that with the production side, we had a success rate of 29%. So I do feel like for those that are on the more emerging side, that would be something to look at, better success rate. And it also gives us an opportunity to get to know you. It gives you an opportunity to get to know us. There is no guarantee that just because we funded a project in development that we're going to then fund them in production, but at least it gives you an avenue, I think, to Ontario Creates and what we have to offer.
Thank you, Anna. That's really useful information. And Rod, I just have a few follow-up questions. And Rod, I'll get to you
Sure.
in a second, just because it's a lot of information to take in.
Yeah,
and I just want to make
of
sure
course.
that we break it down for those at home that are listening who truly understand it. So the first question I have, and I'm wondering if you can open up a little bit in terms of, you talked about Ontario Creates has invested in this diversity stream. So if I'm, like, just in layman's terms, if I'm a producer and I'm on the Ontario Creates website, is there a program that stream applies to, or is that something that behind the scenes that you're investing in and looking at the applications that come in? So how is that diversity stream tangibly applied?
So we have just the one production fund. It's one application that you have to do online. And what we say is there's a document called the Diversity Enhancement Addendum. And if you want to go in the diversity stream, you must submit that document. So you must fill it out, sign it, and send it to us. That document tells us that you want to go in the diversity stream. What we also have on our guidelines is we have the 2 decision criteria grids so that you can compare the 2 side by side and you can see how everything is weighted. So like I said, in the standard stream, the economic impact is worth 40%. Under the diverse stream, it's actually worth 25%. And then we give more weight to the creative elements, and then we give more weight to the production. So, we shift the valuation around a little when it comes to that decision criteria grid. And so it is really you as the applicant telling us which stream you want to go into.
Great, and thank you for clarifying that. And I have a follow-up question in terms of when you say that you're assessing in terms of, on the background that, Ontario Creates is making an investment in diversity. So you're looking at all the applications that come in and you're making sure that there's a tangible commitment. How is that assessed? And we don't have to get into the nitty gritty, but I do want to clarify for people applying, like, is that through the ownership of the corporation in terms of the shareholder structure? Like, how is that assessed?
Well, we look at a number of things. One is we do look at the makeup of the production company. So, we do ask a number of questions, and it could be something where, you do have a production company that is owned by a white male, and they're doing a particular project. But then in the project, they're actually, genuinely working with the community that they're representing on film. That they are putting the story in their hands, that they're putting the power in their hands. These are the kinds of things that we look at. Like I said, we don't want lip service. We don't, you can't give us a project that has a lead woman and say, you see, look, but then it's controlled and helmed by men. That's not what we're looking for. We're not looking for the one diverse cast member that you may have. That's not going to cut it, right? So we're going to be looking at behind the camera, in front of the camera. We're looking at it across the board. And the truth is that your application is only as good as what you're up against. And if you claim to be diverse, you're going to be up against other applications that score very high on the diverse levels. So it could potentially hurt you if you're not as diverse as you think you are.
I think that's an interesting point, that your application is only good as what it's up against. And I think that, especially where there's a lot of diverse talent coming out. And I think that, and I hope with this program, you'll receive a lot more of those applications. Rod, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Sure.
If you can tell us a little bit about what CMF has been doing to promote diversity and support those new producers.
For sure. And I think off the top, framing what diversity is, I think we have to do first, just because the CMF has funded a lot of kind of what it thought was diverse for a long time. We funded the regions of Canada. We had a gender initiative that started in 2017. We've had an Indigenous program since, I believe, the 2000s at the CTF, our predecessor fund. So we've had a lot of initiatives up to the point, but in terms of racial diversity for members of racialized communities, that has been something that the CMF has done a really poor job of. And so that was a priority for us this past year. And we released, if people want to go look on our website, every year we do our program changes, we release a summary of changes. So this year for our equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives focused on racialized producers, we did a 4-prong approach. And so that meant we created the pilot program for racialized communities. That's a siloed, designated program exclusively for companies that are owned and controlled by racialized producers. And so we see, though, that program as the floor. That's the minimum amount that we want to give out, but we have a lot of other carve-outs and incentives to hopefully make sure those numbers go even higher. The second one is our performance envelope program. Basically, the broadcasters get money based on the policy initiatives that we put forward. And so their money goes up each year if they do well. It's almost like you bring home a report card full of A's, your allowance will go up the following year. So this year we put again, licensing factor for diverse producers, including Indigenous and racialized. So that's seen as a bit more to incentivize the broadcasters. Let's get the broadcasters meeting with producers from these communities to license this content. If they do, their money from the CMF will go up. Like let's try and put these people together, because I think that the CMF, we're undertaking a lot of change, and with the Broadcasting Act under review, and we're not sure where that's going to go right now, but we're hoping that legislation and change is really coming. The CMF really views that racialized diversity has been something that it's done a poor job in, and we have to change our practices, not just from, I've said this many times, a moral position, not just because it's the right thing to do, not just because, yes, as leaders, you need to open the tent and give more people different types of opportunities, but we are convinced that on an industrial level, if Canada is no longer competing against just within Canada, but against the world, if we only fund content from people that look like me, with writers' rooms that are filled with people like me, not a disparagement against that, but if that's only what we're doing, we're competing against the world with one hand tied behind our back, because there's more storytellers we're not funding, there's more audiences we're not reaching. So the CMF is taking this very seriously. This is something that there's a cultural imperative for us to do, and there's an industrial one. And I think that if people go to our website and start to look and play around, like there are mandatory carve-outs in our development programs. In our early stage writing programs, there's a diversity of voices exclusive carve-out. Like, we want to change the trajectory of who's getting in what room to make what content, because we also believe that as soon as those communities are hired, they're going to say, oh, I know this whole community of people that are DOPs and editors and actors and actresses and writers that can be on this project that others just may not have been exposed to. Again, that's not an indictment on it, but it's an indictment on the system that has enabled it. And I think we have to change all these little systemic levers that have been kind of baked into the process. It's incumbent on us now to change that process, because we are this process. It's going to take time. I want to kind of plead a little bit of patience. It's not just Rod Butler with his feather writing rules. Like, it's petitioning government and changing, our funding agreement from government. But we're really committed to this change. And I think that if you're a producer that's diverse, and that means if you're a woman, if you're Indigenous, if you're from a racialized community, we're doing a consultation with LGBTQ and people with disabilities this summer. Like, reach out to us. Like, we want your voice, and we want to make sure that we do right by these communities, because they will be doing right by Canada.
I think that's great in terms of putting the initiative on the broadcaster, in terms of, making it mandatory, so they actively need to reach out to diverse producers. And I think that part of it is also just in terms of a frame of mind, you know, because I think that especially when you're new to the business, and you know, I'll tell my story in terms of when I first received funding from Telefilm for the 410, going to the CBC to pitch that project wasn't front of mind for me because I didn't think that there was space at the CBC for a project like the 410. And if I, as a new producer, had that mindset that, you know, they're actively looking for stories like me because it's a funding mandate for them, I think that that allows us to walk into those rooms with a little more confidence. So I think that that's wonderful that you guys recognize that. I do want to talk a little bit about the gatekeeping process in terms of accessing the funds, because I think it can be really daunting at the beginning. And I think that there, you know, with the convergent stream in terms of like necessity, like there needs to be a necessity to have a producer on board. And I know that for the IDM, there's a preference, I'm talking about the IDM, but I wonder for other programs that Ontario creates. I know for the IDM, it's a last in fund, or the preference is that fund is last in. I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the programs that, if you don't have a producer on board and you don't have any other financing, and you talked about the development funds. Can we just name them so people at home taking notes can jot them down and then go on your websites and do that research?
Okay, so just to clarify, so I'm on the film fund side, and we do production and development and marketing for the films that we've supported in production, and an industry development program. So those are the four that I work on. IDM is a separate one, and that's the digital, the interactive digital one. So on the development side, it's twofold. Whether it's development or production, there are two requirements. One is for the production company. You know, you have to be Ontario, you have to have a PE in Ontario. You need to have been there at least a year prior to the deadline of the application. The company has to be Canadian controlled. And then for the producer, you need to be Ontario resident, you need to be Canadian or permanent. And then you have to have produced at least one of a feature film that was theatrically released in Canada, or a television movie, or a drama series, or a documentary series, or 2x1 documentaries, 2x1 hour documentaries that were broadcast in Canada. So you have to have that background in order to apply to either the development or the production fund. Now, what we do is there are some that are more on the emerging side, and if they don't meet that producer requirement, we say, okay, if you bring on an executive producer who does meet that producer requirement, and you have it in writing that they are going to be committed to your project, because we want to make sure that that mentor is there, that they're going to be guiding you, because the only way anybody wins is if you get to the finish line, if you finish that project and get it out and exploit it. So we will consider productions from producers who don't qualify themselves, but bring on this executive producer. And we will look at that. You have to be pre-approved beforehand so you do have to call us and say, this is my project, this is what I want to do, this is the person that I want to bring in. And we will look at them and say, okay, they qualify, or no, they don't qualify. So we do allow that to try and help the emerging producer be able to access our funds. And then the IDM now, I did speak to, our consultant is Danielle, and her information you can find on our website. So the information that she gave to me is emerging producers looking to apply for the IDM. And this is the video content linear stream, because we have two streams. One is for the gaming companies, and then this is the linear stream. So they need to have at least one producer credit on a project that was made publicly available to an audience, including but not limited to a complete season of web series, a feature film, or a television property, or the equivalent of 3 years full-time related industry experience. And so I think that's their way of helping on the IDM side. And then they also have this Futures Workshop program that fast tracks eligibility for candidates who do not meet the experience requirements. And details can be found on the website under the interactive. So I do recommend that some of the emerging producers do look at the IDM guidelines for our, on the digital side. They may have a web series in mind that they want to get to. It is harder on the film fund side. Not going to lie.
Got it. And Rod, do you want to take us into, because I know that you guys have on both sides, you have the experimental stream and then you have the convergent stream. So maybe if you can break those down in terms of accessibility.
I would just say off the top, like the CMF funds company. So when I'm saying producer, that means production company. And so we don't fund individuals at all. So if you're an individual, you need to incorporate. We do, the one area where we would fund not a production company would be something called the Early Stage Development Program, which funds writers. It's basically it allows writers to get funding directly, and it's a selective program. But in terms of, Anna kind of touched on a lot of the really key things. We fund Canadian content owned and controlled by Canadians. Like these are the things in the guidelines that I would just say the best advice we could give to anyone that is starting out, because this is daunting. No one is saying this is easy. And I think if it was easy, there'd be a lot more people trying to be a producer. Like I would say this to anybody. It is the CMF's job to try and be more accessible. And we haven't done as good a job at that. But I would also say it is the producer's job to make it impossible for whatever funder you're applying to say no. You have to do your homework. You have to read your guidelines 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, call and be a pest and ask questions. Like, there's so much competition now that, the level of concierge, let's walk you through your specific situation. The funds are overwhelmed and under budgeted. We don't have the funds to say, we're going to do a tutorial for every person that called. Like we wish that we could, but if we did that, there'd be a lot less money to actually fund great content. So it's this balance of, we want to be accessible, we want to help, but there's so much of a downloaded responsibility on the producer because we're talking about giving you significant amounts of money. So there can't just be, I didn't do the reading, tell me what I have to do, because that's not what the job is. As a producer, you have to navigate this, again, admittedly, Byzantine, archaic framework, patchwork quilt of rules that contradict, and Ontario Creates doesn't jive with CMF, and why is that? And I get it, we all get it, but I would say the best piece of advice is to be a hustler, make it impossible for us to say no, and do your homework, because you would be shocked at the amount of people that read the first page and then want someone to say, give me the gist. And then when they apply, they didn't read to the end, and they don't get funded, and they go, what? And so I would just say, be a beast about this. This is your job. Hustle, ask questions. Don't ask questions the day before it's due. Just like in life, if you have some real interesting questions that you're not sure how it plays out, give yourself a lot of time before that application is due, because these things take a lot of work and it's a lot of time. And the worst thing is for us to not fund a great project because the application was horrible. We're not funding the end project. We don't see inside your amazing mind of the vision. Like, we are funding the application and how good you are at communicating that vision. And so I would say, if you're a producer and you have a blind spot, you're not a strong writer, you're not good with financials, like, it's important for you to know where your blind spots are too, and to say, I need to make this package as slick and as impossible to say no to as possible, because you'd be shocked. We fund a lot of things that are great, but there is a disparity. And until you actually do it a few times, it's a learned skill like anything else. You need to get your reps in, and the first time you apply for funding, it'll not be the best version of that package on the 10th time. And so I think that would be the best piece of advice I would give. With all that said, the CMF has to do a better job of trying to reach out to groups that may not have had historical access to these funds to gain those skills. I think this is where it's a balancing act of, you need to get the reps to get the skills, but if you've never been given the reps and the opportunities to get those skills, it's this vicious cycle. So that's not, an excuse to not do the work, but it's going to have to be both parties coming together. And hopefully the goal at the CMF, we've made commitments, and I think the goal is to change the diversity of who's getting funded. That doesn't mean, again, it's going to happen overnight, but we need to change, because I think we're finding that as the world changes and as content is consumed, we're going to hit that wall where we're just funding the same stuff. And that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to us as an agency. It's not acceptable to taxpayers. It's not acceptable as a business. Why would we not want to put our best and brightest forward for success? So I think that's going to change, but I would say the best of two worlds coming together, and do your homework.
Well, I think that's great. And something that for those at home that are listening, I know that both of your organizations do offer training modules when those funds are opened up for new producers who are applying. And, I think I agree with you, Rod, that those applications are no joke. And particularly, Anna, on the Ontario Create side, I remember attending one, and you guys actually even give a guideline for how much time it's probably going to take to put this together, which is around usually 2 to 3 weeks of like 9 to 5. It's an extensive application, and I think that this is why it serves us to do a broad overview of both of the funds, because I think that we would need days and days to go into the nitty gritty of each one. We're almost out of time, and I'm going to wrap it up with the question that I think that nobody really wants the answer to. But if you're a producer and you apply to the fund and you're not successful, what are the next steps? Can you reapply? Do you give feedback? Because Rod, to your point, it is definitely a process, and I think that sometimes putting in that first application and not getting a win right away can be really hard on somebody who's put a project that is personal to them and means a lot, and then they don't get funded. So in the instance that happens, what are the next steps?
From the CMF side, I would say, so in the performance envelope program, which is the biggest one in the convergence stream, once you get the envelope for the broadcaster, as long as you're eligible, it's automatic. There's not a selection process from any bureaucrat. It's basically you have funding in that program. For anything else, if it's, I would say, the selective funds, that's often what you're talking about in terms of there's a jury or there's a selection team at Telefilm that basically evaluates you with criteria and gives you a ranking. What I do know, though, is you're allowed to call them up when you get a refusal and do almost like an autopsy. What went wrong? Why? They're going to ask you questions. You can ask them, how come I only scored this on team or this on market interest? So there is that ability to say, what went wrong? What did you want to see? And I think the advice I would say is, this industry, there's going to be rejection. There is a finite amount of money for so much demand. So even if you're the best of the best, there's going to be times where it's like, as Anna said, you are graded on a curve. You are graded for your colleagues that year. It's like the Oscars. Sometimes there are strong years. Sometimes they're like, I can't believe that was Best Picture that year. It's a curve. And so that year you may have been amazing, but you may just miss that cutoff line. So that's not an indictment to say, what are you doing with your life? Give up. That means this is a competitive process. That day, the sun didn't shine. Next day, it can shine. So never give up if this is your profession. But I think the autopsy part of it is to say, always learn, always read, and always ask questions. These guidelines, they're opaque. And I, tip my hat to producers. It is such a monumental task, but we're oversubscribed every year and we always give out our money. So like, someone is getting this money. They're no more talented or bright than you who's listening right now. Find a way to get this money. We want to fund the best content. We don't want a bad application to stop that. So we want to fund you. Let's figure it out. But you have to show it on paper, because we can't do a post-mortem after the fact. Oh, that project eventually that got made. Here's your money now. That's not the way it works. So it has to show in the application.
And can you I'll have the same question for you. But so for example, say I put in an application to the experimental stream and I was unsuccessful. In the next round, am I able to put that same application in with perhaps the notes I received from the autopsy, or is it a one-time?
That's a great question. So in the experimental stream, that's a selective program in production. So it's either in the innovation program or the commercial one. Again, people double check this rule, but I believe you're able to come back again. So if you've been denied with project, XYZ, you can come back and resubmit. I think we do cap it at 1 or maybe 2. Again, the exact number is failing me now, but there is a cap. So what we don't want to see, just because we have a finite amount of bandwidth to evaluate this, we don't want people just perpetually saying, here's version 7. Like eventually we have to say, maybe this isn't a fit, try another, build another mousetrap and we'll evaluate that. But you can't just keep, or else I'd be evaluating things right now. So there is that cap, but I think that's why we want people to take our advice and try and take it in, rejig, and come back.
Great. And Anna, can you enlighten us on if I'm a producer that submits to Ontario Creates, specifically maybe to the Film Fund or any fund, what your rules are about resubmission, and if you do provide feedback on the applications?
So if you're unfortunate enough to get the sorry, we're not going to fund your project, with that notification, there is an opportunity there. It says, if you would like feedback, please arrange it with us, which is very important. It's surprising the number of people who don't take us up on it. And the point behind the feedback is to discuss deficiencies with you so that when you come back, you're coming back with a stronger application. So it really is for the applicant, not for us. The other thing is that we say you can't come back unless you have this feedback call with us, because we do need to go over the deficiencies. It could be, on the production side, it could be that it was ineligible. So you just didn't meet the requirements, and you need to know that because you can't keep coming back if you're not eligible for the fund. It could be that it's incomplete. So you need to understand that if you're incomplete or ineligible, you're not even going to the jury. Like we're cutting it off very early on in the process. And then if you go to jury and you're rejected by the jury, we can tell you what the, what the highlights were, what the issues were. Most of the time, it's the funding. The funding just isn't there, and we keep stressing that we are a last-in financier. So you do need to have the other financing in place. And a lot of the times we get it, and it's like they're not there. There's just too much of their budget that is unconfirmed. And so we will work with people, and they make changes, and then they come back, because there is no point in submitting the exact same application that was already rejected. There just isn't any point to that whatsoever. And there are a number of times where, so on the production side, there is strike 3 and you're out for a project. So we do limit it. So you do want to make sure that you get that feedback call from us and that you come back stronger. And we've had juries that have said yes to projects that it was their final time that they can come in. And then they finally got, on the third time, they finally took care of everything else that the other juries had recognized as issues. And they provided a much cleaner and stronger application to the jury. So it's vital that they do it on the development side. If a project is rejected, you're only allowed to come in once per cycle, and the cycle is the actual year, the whole year. And then you will have to wait until the following year to reapply for that project. But it's not to say that a producer can only come in once. So a producer can come in multiple times. It's just the limit is on the project itself.
Got it. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you guys so much for your time. I think for those listening at home, I think that the biggest takeaways were that it is complicated. These applications do take a lot of time, and I really appreciate both of you being candid and not sugarcoating that part of the process. But I think that the silver lining definitely is that you guys are available to support those new producers and those resources, and even if you're not successful. And I think that for, you know, in terms of also just to give some hope to those at home, when you're putting these applications together, I think that one, for me anyways, like one of the most useful things is that your project becomes clear to you as well. And, you know, Rod, you were saying that you write the guidelines, and I think it really does help as a producer to start now. You know, if you're not successful, the failure can only lead to further successes if you take advantage of those resources.
Right.
And both of your funds are certainly great resources, both at the beginning and at the end. Thank you so much for your time today. And hopefully you'll hear from a lot of the listeners soon.
Hopefully. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.